In this video, we'll look at implementing DragDrop in two lists. So again, in this example, we're just allowing the user to drag from one list to the other. We have two display array statements that we'll need to manage, and what we're going to need to look at is what happens when the user drags something from the left side and drops it to the right. What happens when the user drags something from the right side and tries to drop it to the left. Let's take a look first at the form. And again, we are using tables here, but you could use tree containers. And we've got two display arrays and we've got two records. We've got our screen record left mapped to the left table and screen record right mapped to the right table. Now if we look at the code for this, again we're going to see a DND object, a drag drop object that we have named DND. We're also setting up two constants, and they're setting up two constants here so that we can just use the keyword sleft to represent the left screen record and sright to represent the right screen record. We open and display the form, and again we're going to load the arrays with data. Now you see the beginning of using an additional variable to manage the drag index, and the drag index is going to be simply an integer, but it's going to represent the position in the array. So as the user begins to drag, what was the position in the array for the object? The next thing we see is the dialog statement. Now notice here we have embedded or nested the two display array statements, the one for the left and the one for the right, within an overall dialog, interactive dialog statement, so that we can have both of these display arrays open and available enabled at the same time so the user can choose between them. The code for these is exactly the same except for the difference in whether we're working with the sleft or sright list. So let's look at the left display array and see what's happening here. We've already learned a little bit about the on-drop interaction block, so let's look at that first. The on-drop block is going to handle what happens when the user drops a DND object, a drag drop object, into this list. The first thing we're doing is we're going to check the source. Where did this drag object come from? If its source was the left side, then we're just going to simply call the DropInternal. In other words, the user is just simply reordering the list, so we're going to just call the DropInternal method, which does all the functionality needed to put that object in a new position in the list. If the dragged object coming into this left side list is not from the left side, we are going to let the drop index get the location row. Now the location row is another method in the DragDrop class, and if we pull up the documentation, we can see in the DragDrop class all of the different methods, and the getLocationRow returns the index of the row the mouse is pointing to during the drag drop. In other words, as we drop this new object into the left-hand list, let's get its location row. Then we're going to insert the row using our dialog class InsertRow method, and insert the row on the left with the drop index, which is the position where the user was wanting to place it. Then we're going to set the current row to the left side in the position where they dropped it. So we're on that newly added item. And then we're going to set its value. So we want the value to be exactly what was dragged over. So if it was item 4, that's what this drag value is, a string variable that we're going to apply to that. And then we're going to delete the row from the right side. So again, as the user drags from the right over to the left, the on drop on the left is activated. And here we can see, let me move this over a little bit. If they drop it here, it's going to just reorder. If they drag it over, then the on drop for the left side is triggered, and we insert it over here, and we have removed it from the right side. Now let's talk a little bit about the other interaction blocks that we see being used in this display array. The first one we see here is on DragStart. So as the user drags or begins the drag from this left side, what we're doing is setting the value of the variables that we've set up. So we're setting the drag source so that we know this particular object has come from the left side. We're setting its index to the current position in the array, and we're setting its value to whatever the value was in that for that particular item. If we drop down here to on DragEnter, this is controlling what happens as a object is entering the left side list. So on DragEnter, if the drag source is null, then set the operation to null. In other words, if drag source, which we set either as S left or S right, if it hasn't been set, we're basically going to ban the drop from occurring. Okay, so on DragEnter, set operation to null if the drag source is not S left or S right or something else that has been checked. So if it's null, we're going to set the operation to not allow a drop. You can set operation, the default is to move, but you could set the operation to copy as well if you wanted. Okay, so instead of, you could use this DND set operation over in the drop or one of the other interaction blocks to determine what kind of drag this is going to be. Are we going to allow, is it going to be a copy from one list to another? Is it going to be a move? And the default is to move. Then on DragFinished, we're simply initializing the drag source to null. So once we've completed the drop in the left-hand side, the on DragFinished is triggered, and we are going to set the drag source back to null. All right, so this is just one implementation of moving items from one list to another. Something else that you can add on to this would be allowing the user to select multiple rows, and that would be adding the multi-row select and moving one or more rows over from one side to the next.